We'll move on to the next panel, Phubbing. I'm sure all of you are curious as to what that means. The rise of the literary e-zine. Indira, Chandrasekhar, Rahul, Soni, in conversation with Divya Dubey about reading literary journals on the internet or on your phone. Institutes in India, the US and Switzerland. Though she is a PhD in biophysics, her calling lay elsewhere. She started writing fiction with an increasing focus on the short story upon returning to India after more than 17 years abroad. Her work appears in a slew of international magazines, including Far Enough East, Empress Review, Eclectica magazine, The Little magazine, among others. She's been internationally recognized for her work on Pangea, an anthology of stories from around the globe that she co-edited at the Unison Publications annual competition in 2010. Her short stories have received the international recognition and has been shortlisted, most notably in the Dyslexia Short Story Competitions 2010 and 12. Rahul Soni, he wears multiple editorial hats and is currently editorial head at Writer's Side, a literary agency and manuscript assessment service, associate editor with Almost Island, a journal for literature that threatens, confronts, or bypasses the marketplace, editor at large with Asymptote, an international journal of literature and translation, and season coordinator at the Sangam House International Writers Residency Program. His love for the word led him to establish Pratilipi, a literary journal which he also edited from 2008 to 12, as well as Pratilipi Books, an independent publishing imprint. He was awarded the Charles Wallace Visiting Fellow at the University of East Anglia in 2010 on literary translation and is the recipient of prestigious Sangam House Fellowship. And Divya Dubey, an alumnus of the redoubtable St. Stephen's Delhi University, Divya Dubey also counts Oxford Brookes University, Oxford as her alma mater. She has authored Turtle Dove, 6 Simple Tales, her own collection of short stories, and occasionally puts pen to paper or fingers to keyboard for articles and short stories for mainstream newspapers and magazines. She also conducts creative writing workshops and is a guest lecturer at Aurobindo Institute, Delhi. She is the founder of Jnana Books, an independent small trade publishing firm focusing on fiction and non-fiction for adults and young adults.
Today on this panel with veterans like Rahul and Indira. Actually, it's funny, you know, when Janvi got in touch with me and spoke to me about this session on Phubbing, I felt rather daft because I had no clue what Phubbing meant. And for those of you who are still wondering, it's actually a term introduced by the Macquarie Dictionary. It's when you know, you're trying to speak to a friend and that friend is too busy pressing buttons on the mobile phone. That is called phubbing. So you can turn around and say, okay, stop phubbing now. Now, in this context, it's been used in the positive sense because what she means is since you are busy phubbing anyway, you might as well look at some literary journals online. Now, the previous session with Vikram and Siddharth was something that took you into flashback. We are probably going to do the opposite. We are going into flash forward. So, Indira, let's begin with you. You are supposed to be the pioneer of literary online journals in India. Now, you have a very interesting background from biology to literature, from writing to publishing. How did it all happen, and how did you decide to move into online publishing?
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you, Divya, and thanks, Festival, for having us here. I guess it's just, I have partially active left brain, right brain facilities maybe, and I just, I researched for a long time in science, but some part of my mind was always working in fiction, I suspect, and So there's really no straight answer to how the transition happened. But to address the question of online journals, I think the thing that's interesting about an online journal is, one is, of course, all the obvious advantages that you can disseminate it so widely without going into print and dealing with printers, that you have an audience that reaches across the globe, a readership that reaches across the globe. And, but what's interesting too about an online journal is, does it change the nature of literature? I mean, we're using a different medium, will that impact the way in which we write and the way in which we read? And I think all of these things were in my mind, especially when I was focusing on literature from the subcontinent and thinking about writers who have, of course, from the dreaded word diaspora, but also from the subcontinent themselves, thinking about all of them writing with the shared experience and yet on this providing a platform on a new medium, and how does that impact the way in which we examine this literature?
Was there any particular trigger? Because at that time, not much was happening on the online front, I think.
Well, I think the trigger was my own writing. I started writing, and at some point I grew to think, well, this is not bad, you know, maybe somebody would want to read it, and I thought, let's put it out there. And Well Illustrated Weekly was gone, you know, and so I started looking at places to publish, and so many of the journals, literary journals that were accessible were abroad. And many of them had very specific kinds of bents. There were, of course, very adventurous journals as well. But I found, as an Indian writer or a writer from India with my author, and I thought, goodness, there must be others like me, and that sort of motivated me. I talked to Sam, who's out there, and a couple of other friends, and then decided, yes, let's just start a journal oneself.
Right. Rahul, 3 journals, and all with very interesting names: Asymptote, Pratilipi, and Almost Island. Now, would you like to speak about all 3 and tell us about the concept and the titles and how you got involved with all 3 of them?
Well, I started out with Pratilipi. That was when I was, well, a practically unknown writer, and another friend of mine who was also at the time practically unknown as a writer, we decided to get together and start a magazine because there weren't enough journals around, as Indira was saying. There was hardly any places where you could send to, or which would carry the kind of writing that you'd want to read, or at least we would want to read. So that's how Pratilipi came about. And because Giriraj was a Hindi writer and I was an English writer, it naturally came into this bilingual sort of area where he'd choose the Hindi stuff and I'd do the English, and it would be all there together.
And you also did some books, right? Some
that did
print-
come
print.
later, but it did start off as just a journal.
I see.
And why it was an online journal is, again, it's very simple. That's the cheapest way to do it. And the cheapest way to also bring out a journal and make sure it gets distributed as widely as possible.
Yeah.
There's a whole world out there that can read it. If you go into print, you'll be struggling with how to distribute it, even within the city perhaps, forget the world. Anyway, it started out as bi-monthly, and as we started gravitating towards other work and other commitments, it started slowing down in its periodicity. It turned into a quarterly, and then a half-yearly, and then a yearly, and now it's pretty much gone off the tracks, which is one of the things I think all online journals eventually struggle with.
No, don't say that.
I hope not. Not out of print or Asymptote or Almost Island. But yeah, that's the part we struggle with, which is how to make sure it's sustainable.
Yeah.
And yeah, we couldn't really solve it. We thought the book publishing business would probably go some way to recovering costs, but that did not happen. And again, yeah, that's a whole lot, another issue altogether. But eventually I decided, okay, this is not happening anymore. And that's when I was approached by Almost Island, and they said, why don't you join us? And by that time, I was already translating stuff, and so they wanted someone who could whom they could consult on translations, and who could bring in stuff like that, which is also approximately the same time when Asymptote happened, which is a fairly new journal. Almost Island came into being almost the same time as Pratilipi, which was 6 years ago.
Okay.
And Asymptote just had its 3rd anniversary, and it was formed to focus just on translations from around the world and nothing else.
Okay, could you explain what the titles signify?
Okay. Asymptote is a mathematical
That's
term.
what I saw. I
Yeah,
didn't go any
yeah.
further into the geometric.
Yes, so I'm not the right person.
explanation. Yeah.
But it's about this kind of graph, which is which has a curve, and it almost meets, but they don't quite, and that's kind of a metaphor for translation, in some sense. Almost Island is, again, as you read, as Namrata read out, a journal that threatens or confronts the marketplace.
Right.
And so it's standing at a remove from what is the more consumable sort of literature, as we would say, and focuses largely on experimental and experimental poetry and prose, as well as discussions about those. They also have a
Right.
conference where a few writers gather every year and just have an intensive discussion about craft. So it's very much focused, not entirely away from readership, but it's focused towards writers more. And
Okay.
that's why I guess the Almost Island
Island, okay.
comes in.
Okay. You know, there's this thing on the Pratilipi website which says that the virtual space allows you more freedom with eccentricities of form. Now, what exactly do you mean by that?
Well, again, print publishing is governed so much by costs and logistics
Right.
that, like it or not, you do have to at some point maybe compromise on what the marketplace does want. And as it turns out, it's not always the stuff that pushes literature forward. It's usually stuff that's already out there, and people say, okay, we like this, we want more of this. And yeah, because of the costs involved, print publishing usually has to keep that in mind. Whereas an online publisher, which has almost zero costs, which can have almost zero costs, not always, but yeah, they are freer to do stuff like, again, which Almost Island does, or which Pratilipi also tried to do, among other things.
Right. He just mentioned, you know, the stuff that the market wants. Now, is that something you have ever explored? Because literary journals, as far as I have seen, usually tend to take serious writing into consideration, and most of our genres are limited to that. But have you ever explored this possibility of something more casual, something more accessible to people or general readers?
I think all literature is accessible to general readers in some senses, even when it's literary fiction. But I think in terms of actually stepping outside or stepping into genre fiction, if you want to call it that, we're open to it so long as it has a certain standard and literary merit. I think to write in the sort of white boy science fiction pace of my growing up years, that doesn't work for me, you know, as an editor anymore. So thinking about science fiction, I wouldn't perhaps go in that direction. But on the other hand, if you sort of slip into Slipstream, where you have all of these worlds intersecting, and that is in some senses an extension, I suppose, of science fiction or fantasy, yes, we do carry that. So we've had, for example, a little detective story. We've had, I don't like to use the word chick lit, but
Yeah.
You know, the phrase chick lit, I think it's considered politically incorrect, but in any case, that kind of fiction. And so, yes, we don't confine ourselves to any particular form, but I think we just look at whether the writing has a pace that appeals to us. You know?
And in your experience, what has been the most popular in terms of?
Oh God, I'm not a
genre.
technically savvy person, so I do get all of these. I do get all of these numbers back from the
Right.
tech people telling me, you know, what's been most hit on and what's been most read. And to be honest, I haven't paid that much attention. I don't know if I can answer that. I think there's that we've had a lot of popular writers. We've had, or well-known writers rather. What has been the most popular and well-read? That's also a really difficult thing. It depends on whether the writer has a number of friends who are tapping into their stories. So I don't know really if that's
What
easy
about
to
you,
judge.
Rahul? Sorry.
It's really hard to tell actually, because there's this very interesting disconnect between, let's say, so there's a few metrics. There's hits, which is
Yes.
basically if some person somehow just lands on a page. Then there's time spent on a page. And then there's things like Facebook likes. And none of them are necessarily correlated. I remember an example from when I was with Pratilipi, and we had this hugely popular author, who I won't name.
Oops, that means it's not a flattering story, right?
Well, it's an instructive story, let's say. So yeah, this author shared the piece which we published on Pratilipi on the Facebook wall, and we suddenly started seeing lots of likes happening with that. It went up to more than 400 likes in a day. When we looked up Google Analytics, maybe 10 people had actually come to that page.
Yes.
So yeah, it's almost impossible to tell for what reasons something is perceived as popular or how popular it actually is. Someone might just open a page and let it lie for 10 minutes and not read it at all, and it might show up as, it might indicate that you might have read it, but it's not by no means certain.
Exactly, and I think in any case, people who submit to something like out of print, if they really wanted to be hugely popular, they'd be writing a different kind of fiction. You know, if they wanted to be in that popular genre, they'd be and massively read. They would probably not be writing the kind of fiction that'd be coming to us. I think.
That's another question I wanted to ask you. Since it's easier to keep track of what pages people are visiting and what the writers they are reading, does that stop you from publishing new writers or unknown writers? Or does it ever occur to you that people may not visit this page as much? Is it a consideration?
Not at all. And as I just said, you find out at some point that the statistics are essentially meaningless, and you can't really rely on them for any sort of judgment on what to print and what not to. But I don't think either of us started our magazines with the intent of only putting out what people wanted to read.
In fact, we're completely not statistics driven at all. We just...
That's good to hear. Yes. Okay, what does virtual space offer that print does not?
You know, when we started off at Out of Print, I was, of course, partly because of my own fiction, I was reading a lot of literary journals from around the world, and there were all these interesting ones that would do these funky, cool things, which was, create labyrinths of stories. You read in whichever direction you want to go, and you create these stories that you, the reader, is creating the story and making choices, sort of like video games, I guess.
Nothing more to add.
I think another thing we usually come across is that, with virtual space, you don't bother about physical boundaries, so it's actually accessible to everybody. Now, you have done a lot of translations, I think, for 2 of your journals, of course, Hindi and English being one part of that. and other international languages as well. Is that it? Now, most of the literary journals that we have here are completely non-commercial. How does it work for you? How do you pay your translators, and how do you ensure quality? How does it work?
Yeah, well, that's one of the worst parts about being a writer, and even worse if you're a translator, is that you can't even think of making a living on it. And no, online journals rarely ever pay, and we don't either. So that's not something we're proud of, but that's how it has to be at the moment. We'd like to reach a stage where we can do that, but I don't see it happening in the near future, considering also how, in general, with the glut of writers perhaps, or people who want to be publishing, there's just too much supply, and it's always easy to find people who are willing to get published.
So it's basically goodwill. All of us existing on goodwill.
But I think of it in another way, actually. It's yes, it's goodwill, but I think it's a service in a sense to provide a platform. Yes, of course, I'd love to pay, but we can't. But I think as a writer, for me, to have a platform which is curated, which is edited with integrity, where other writers who have high quality also showcase their work. I mean, that's a huge plus. Otherwise, how does your work reach the world, right? And so in that sense, I think, even though we can't pay, and we are existing on the goodwill of writers to send us stuff, on the other hand, we are providing a platform where we maintain a great deal of integrity. So I think that's one way of thinking of it.
Important question. How do we make these journals commercially viable? Is there any solution to that? Any ideas?
Every journal pretty much is struggling with that. Asymptote has started, Kickstarter and Indiegogo drives, but again, it works for one time, it may work for a second time. How often that can go on is something we still have to see. Almost Island has private donors. Pratilipi had nothing and it pretty much folded, so
have you tried for sponsorships, etc.? No.
Yeah, we have thought about it, and we have explored different possibilities. We've even talked to people who know things about doing business and will help us with this sort of thing. But in the end, you tie yourself up into a lot of administration when you end up having, the formality of sponsorships and grants. And I wasn't ready for that, and I think neither were any of my editors. And that has its cost impact as well, of course. And then occasionally we've had these really sort of people who say, we'd love to come and help you, but then you think, oh, I don't know, I mean, what are we tying ourselves into if we tie up with somebody who's an unknown, how does it impact the sensibility of the journal? So, yeah.
I think it's better for academic journals, maybe, since they, people are willing to pay to download information and.
That's right. And academic journals are usually associated with an academic institution which has funding for it, right? So, yeah, I guess that would be a good way to go. We kind of start approaching universities, literature departments, and say, sponsor our journal.
What about Google Ads? I mean, yesterday there was a discussion, and people were thinking about getting Google Ads for promoting books online. But what about journals?
It just, I don't know, for me it just kills the reading experience if you stuff your web page with ads. And it's not something I'd like to inflict on a reader who's already having a hard time because we're not used to still, we're still adapting to reading online. There's no sense in adding more distractions and making it an unpleasant experience.
Yeah, that is one thing that really bothers me.
Yes.
When you create a page and it looks very classy and nice, and then you think about getting all these ads and seeing that little jabong shoes flashing in the corner, that's quite off-putting, I think.
Yeah.
But that's, for me personally.
Yeah.
What about you? You think?
No, I agree. I think if our advertisers would be happy to have it on some back page, of the journal flashing through, but nobody will ever get to. But of course, that defeats the purpose.
All right. What about ebooks? Have you ever thought about producing journals as ebooks? That's a question I've been asked by a lot of people. And what's your take on it?
Oh, well, we did think about it for Pratilipi. The thing is, it doesn't make, or more and more, it doesn't make a significant difference. You can always, if you have an ebook reader, send out an article to your Kindle, for example, and it gives you pretty much the same experience. What we do with Almost Island is provide a PDF, so you can download that, print it out if you like, or read it somewhere else if you like. I mean, it's definitely something worth considering, but yeah, I'm not sure how much of a difference it makes, as in, yeah, the reading experience is pretty much the same. If you get a magazine, you don't always read every piece in it. You mark out the ones that you'd like to read and then keep coming back to them, for example. And you can pretty much do the same with any web page online. So you have the same facilities.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. You and also because without a print, it's short fiction. Maybe if we had, a 4,000-page novel, it makes a difference. But with short fiction, I think the facility of reading on any medium is fairly straightforward. We were approached by, it's still in discussion, partly because they're a bunch of volunteers and we're a bunch of sort of volunteers, if you want to call it that, by a mobile phone company that wants to run our stories on their mobiles. They do it as a service, mainly for children's books, but also for adult education. They wanted to offer stories from our journal. And but then, it's in process, it's going along, and they have some little conversion software, an app, I guess, which makes it accessible. But really, when I download out of print on my not so dandy little Samsung, it looks fine, So.
You just mentioned children, and talking about children and young adults, I think they are the ones who are using the net most. Have you ever considered doing a children's journal or a journal for young adults? Do you think that's an area that could be fruitful in terms of not just putting out information, but that could also be made commercially viable?
And I'm sure it's worth considering, but yeah, I since it doesn't coincide with my interest in literature, I don't think I'm the right person to answer that.
Yeah, in terms of commercial viability, I haven't thought about that, but it certainly seems that it would be more. But in terms of just content, I think it would be wonderful to have somebody produce a really beautiful, illustrated online journal for children.
I haven't really come across any here. Do we have any?
Not to my knowledge, yeah. But again, the world is so unbounded, so people access anything anywhere. But that's not going to be me who's editing that, I think, at least not at this point in time.
What about the audio-visual media that you spoke of? How do you utilize those to the full? The medium audio and the visuals, things like podcasts. Have you tried any of those on your online journals?
Well, with Asymptote, we do have audio,
Right.
almost always accompanying any translation. We have the author reading out the original in the original language, so readers can get a feel for the sound of it.
Right.
That's one way to go about it. And we have on occasion carried video pieces as well in both Asymptote and Pratilipi. I'm sure there are ways in which it can be done, which we haven't even thought of. Interactive stuff and all that, which frankly, I never had the technical chops to be able to do that, so we never got around to experimenting with that. But that, I'm sure that would be really interesting, and we could do like lots of stuff along those lines, especially with young adult and children's fiction, perhaps.
Yeah, no, it could be fun. Actually, when we started off, and as I told you, I mean, I was getting sort of distracted by all the possibilities. One of my early editors had an absolute aversion to having the story read out, you know, to listening to a story read. For her, it was distracting, and she liked to read the story, not to hear the story. So at that point, apart from other reasons, you know, that sort of went off the radar. I still think if you have an audio book of a very, you know, which is read beautifully, and it is kind of moving, but we haven't really gone further with the idea. Have you?
Well, once we did, because usually what happens is not too many people visit poetry pages. But once we put a piece of poetry set to music, and yes, people were interested. So we did have a lot of people visiting that page. So probably they enjoy, you know, listening to things or seeing things for themselves as videos maybe. That is one area I would definitely like to explore. I mean, that is what I'd set out to do, and we still haven't got there. So, but yes, someday. And another thing, I think, which happened very recently, about 2 months ago, was the Twitter Literature Festival, if you came across. And now I saw on your website something happening. I mean, you are doing some interesting things on Twitter.
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes, I'd love to. Actually, it's kind of an interesting idea which came from one of my editors, Ram Sadashiv. This was a story that Leela and I had both liked, but had been, you know, hadn't yet been read by Ram. And he read it, and then he, you know, we usually sort of correspond about editing. We're in different corners of the globe, so that's a big advantage actually of being online. They're each in different cities, different continents. And he read it, and we were waiting for his response. And instead of a response, we got back this little extract from the story that he had created, which he felt was the essence of the story. Sort of a hyper-lish-esque kind of editing, I guess, where he just kind of got to the core of it. And that was kind of cool and exciting, and we thought, oh, wow, yes, it does. It sheds a whole lot of the story, but it captures kind of the key aspects of it, which is this young woman who's terribly, all of this happens in college, a young woman who's terribly attracted to this chap whom she doesn't really like, but who's obviously attractive to other women as well, and she doesn't really like that either, but she can't help herself. She's totally attracted by him, and in the end, they are in college, and they sort of drift off. The whole intense little interaction drifts away, and they go and get their samosas and go to class. You know, that's kind of the essence of the story that he extracted from the whole short story. And so we decided to run it as a little Twitter thing where we, you know, ran a line a day, and then it would link to the story which we had featured on the Out of Print blog. And yeah, it seems to have got some interest, and I think what we're trying to do actually, which I think again addresses that question which I sort of forgot, is to generate a kind of sense of community through the web, and what obviously it takes time, and you have to be very proactive to do it, and often we end up not being as proactive as we should be, but is to generate discussion about the ways in which the stories are edited, or this Twitter extract, or another one that may come along, the way in which the editor saw the essence of the story, and to generate active discussion where we focus, for example, on a particular segment of the story and create a link to it, and generate a whole sort of workshop around that kind of thing. So that's what is in the making. Of course, we're awfully slow with all of this, and it just goes along and happens suddenly. So
yeah, this one came from Meghna Pant. I think the the Mahabharata she did in 100 tweets.
Yes, that's right.
And do you do a lot of mythology? Is that a very popular
We had,
genre? You have?
we had a mythology
A separate section.
mythology issue. I think it was our fourth one. We had a story by Samhita. We had a feature by Pushpamala. We had a lot of artwork connected to mythology as well that we used. We had a couple of really interesting stories. We were quite new then. We were quite new, and then of course we had Samhita's sort of wisdom to add to it. We might do it again because we do seem. It does still seem to be like a compelling driving force for a lot of writers, and so we might, but it's in the offing, but not.
Rahul, how do you use or choose your themes, and how do you choose what to translate, what works, what authors?
Well, as far as choosing theme goes, I'm in the fortunate position of not being the editorial head of either of the magazines I'm working with anymore. So, yeah, I can avoid that part. As far as choosing what to translate goes, I can only translate from Hindi, so it has to be a Hindi book before anything else. And it just has to strike me as something that can contribute to furthering my understanding of literature, or what the possibilities of literature are, maybe, or in the process of bringing that into English, you discover new ways to use English, if that makes sense. So yeah, that's how I end up choosing what to translate.
I think what this whole discussion has brought to the fore is that there are a lot of areas still left unexplored, and there is a lot that can still be done. You have done a lot of short story contests, etc. How do you try and drive traffic to your websites? I mean, apart from contests, are there?
We haven't actually run any contests ourselves,
You
partly
haven't,
because we
okay.
need, no, we have run workshops.
Okay.
And people come to those, and then one of the features that we offer from the workshop is that if people finish the story and send it back to us, then we'll run a special segment on the blog on the workshop stories.
So are these online workshops, or are these
Mostly face-to-face. At literary festivals like Lekna, for example, or what have you. But I think in terms of contests, one of the key things is actually the financial aspect as well, because we did find a sponsor once for a contest, and again, you know, when you align with somebody for a particular thing, there's very much that sensitivity to the different sensibilities that are in play. And so finding a sponsor has got to be just right. And then I think I'm just a bit lazy about it, to be honest. We think about it and talk about it, but haven't done it.
Oh,
Well, Asymptote has, not very long ago, it ran a contest, a translation contest. And driving traffic to it is just a combination of social media, Twitter, Facebook, whatever else is there. I'm totally unaware about social media, actually. And besides that, it's word of mouth. We have a huge team of editors from like maybe nearly 20 countries now, I think. And over 3 years, we have accumulated like a huge list of contributors as well. So if you have enough goodwill, if you are doing enough good work, there will be people, there will be a whole network of people spreading the word out, and that's how it works, I guess.
is
for
most of your work commissioned, or do you look at unsolicited stuff also?
It's a mix of both. I think largely I'd say it's people you know are doing some work that you're interested in, or people you know who'd be good at something that you approach. We do get lots of unsolicited stuff as well, and there's often enough, but not in immense quantities, but there's often enough something really good hidden in there.
What about you, Indira? Is a lot of your stuff commissioned, or
Occasionally, yeah. So we write to, I mean, when I meet writers whom I find interesting or whose work I like, or even someone who's just starting to write, I always say, send in your work. Very occasionally we ask for a particular story that one knows or is reprinting, because we occasionally reprint. But most of the time, yeah, again, it's word of mouth, social media. When we started off, once I thought, oh my gosh, who's going to end up submitting to us? But actually, we're fairly well flooded. How about you? Do you get it out there through social media? Or?
a lot of it, yes, through
Yeah.
Facebook and LinkedIn and
Yeah.
all those.
Yeah.
Most of it, actually.
Yeah.
And a few through word of mouth, and people who've written to us, written for us before. A lot of those return, so like that. And finally, do you think there is going to be a paperless world very soon?
Not in the near future, I don't think. I mean, it's almost a cliche now, but the book is an immensely well-designed piece of hardware, and it's a great user interface. I mean, I'm a big fan of the Kindle. I do most of my reading on it, but somehow I find that, especially if there's something that I remember and that I have to look for, it's almost impossible to do that with any electronic text, or especially an ebook. Like you vaguely recall a line that went sort of like this, and yeah, you can't for the life of you find it again. So that's much easier, because we have like a physical recall of where roughly it was in an actual book, perhaps. And apparently there's studies that say even the reading experience and the comprehension levels are entirely different when you're reading online, when you're reading on the Kindle and on paper. So I think we still have a way to go before we're paperless, like a long way.
Did you, before any of you, I mean, either of you started your online journals, think of doing a print version? Did you? No.
We did an online version because we couldn't afford to do a print version. That's as simple as that.
No, it was never really an option. One time I got something printed for what I thought would be a good kind of publicity thing when we were starting off, and I thought, how are people going to know about the journal? So I tried to get these little cards printed. I mean, they were sweet, but it was so traumatic, you know, going to the printer and figuring it out, and then, oh my gosh, it's slightly skewed and not properly cut. I thought if I were doing this all the time, I'd go crazy, you know. So no. But to get back to your question about the paperless thing, it's an interesting... I mean, does it really matter in a sense? You know, does the medium really matter? I was reading this article in the Paris Review recently by a guy called David Zaret, and he was talking about reading Walden, which is Henry Thoreau's book about moving away from the superfluity and consumerism of urban society to the woods, as it were. And he's reading this book, and he feels it's ironic that he's reading it. David Zaret says that I'm reading it on my iPad. But then he examines the whole question of the medium and you know, the whole processing that goes into creating a book and the mechanics of it is not that different, in his opinion anyway, from creating an electronic version. And certainly it's going to generate a different kind of trash. I don't know what we're going to do with all the piles of old iPads. At least we can burn the old books or pulp them, I suppose.
Any other issues you would like to bring up, or you have any anecdotes, any experiences to share?
I think people are still slightly suspicious, though, of online journals, you know, and so when I say that I publish in literary journals, people who are not from the literary world, most of them look at me as if I'm some kind of slight failure, you know. I think, no, an online journal is a really respectable place. It's edited, it's curated, it's really high quality. And it's funny because I think in the popular imagination it isn't yet a kind of a valid platform, really. But I think in the literary scene it certainly is, and hopefully it'll change. because I feel almost that I'm driven to have to bring together collections of my own work simply to validate the fact that publishing in a literary journal is a good thing to do, you know.
It's true. Anything you want to add? All right, I think we are ready to take questions from the audience.
Though it must be so hot, I don't know, poor things, so probably nobody really has anything to ask.
Everyone's lining up outside, they're hungry.
Anybody? Okay.
You know, when we started this session, I have to say, Rahul said, you know, I'm going to be really brief. And I thought, oh, Lordy, now I'm going to be the one who'll be babbling away and Rahul's going to be all concise and sharp.
Isn't that what happened?
No.
Yes.
I don't have a question per se, but I have some opinion or observation to share. I come from a technology background, recently came into writing, written my book, and again, social media marketing, lot of things, how to go about it. I read an article from somebody on senior marketing management from Kindle, and they were also, so the jargon around it is that in olden age, the kind of information people used to consume in a lifespan now is coming in a day. So there's the kind of flooding of information that is happening to human beings, and there's lot of information, lot of availability, and nobody knows how to find the right path. So there's lot of hand-holding required, there will be good piece of information, but you don't know how to find it. So those are the, I think, a struggle that has to be resolved. So obviously these are interesting things that they have to made, things have to be made available, but at the same time, hand-holding, guiding, and those are the questions I think have to be resolved.
I mean, it's a great point. I think when, you know, e-publishing or self-publishing rather came into the fore, one of the whole issues is, I mean, it's a perfectly valid way to bring out your work, right? But the issue is, has it been read by somebody else? Has somebody else commented on it? Is there some standard to which you're holding yourself, or are you your only critique, you know? And so I think that when you have this glut of information, providing a platform which is curated, which is edited, where it's already sieved through, perhaps in editor's eyes, an editor you don't like, then you find somebody else, but sieved through a process and has been held to a certain quality, I think is an important thing.
Resolved or maybe drive through, because recently I keep sharing a lot of things. And what actually happened with one of the story, I tried Google Translator. So I thought, okay, I'll translate it. It's an English piece of information, and I thought I'll put it in Hindi. So I used Google Translator, and that actually spoiled the emotion of my story. So that is what happened, and I created a video of it, and I shared. I posted on YouTube. So that's what I have done. Now, when I share it, somebody likes it. So this person, I asked him, how do you feel about it? Then he said, I didn't read it. I'm just in the habit of liking whatever you share. So I just liked it. So that is what is happening. So, I mean, I agree with the point that, okay, somebody has to go through it and understand. But because lack of time and also access of information, people are not actually going through it. They're just browsing through it. So they are just going through keywords and things like that. So obviously things are being made available, but what is happening is the depth is not being perceived or captured. That was the point I was trying to convey. Yeah.
Yes, we need to reach the right target audience, I guess. Anybody
Do we have any
else?
questions?
I have a question. As a writer, if one is a writer, then how does one scout for the right publisher? How would you know where to go, to whom to approach to, and to submit to?
For an online journal?
No, for a print.
For a print?
For a fiction writer. How does, I mean, are you guys available online to know what kind of publisher you are, what kind of work you take? And because very often I've heard of people who have had it printed but have had experiences of it being rejected by several people and then finally finding it. So that in itself is a task for finding the right publisher, right? So how does one go about doing that?
Well, usually people prefer to go to the multinationals first and the well-known publishers, Indian and big or small. who are established. These days, of course, there are a lot of new independent publishing houses as well. And so are some of these self-publishing avenues. So you need to know what exactly you want. Of course, you can talk to a lot of people because now with the social media, all these questions are easily answered. And most of these publishers have their own websites which tell you very clearly the guidelines you need to follow. I think that basically serves.
And also I should point out that the session is on online literary journals. So in that sense, we, Divya was a publisher of print books, but that's not really what we're representing here in that sense. And I think all of us are writers as well. And you know, so each of us probably goes through this experience ourselves looking for the right publisher. So. Actually, there are no questions from the audience. Oh, there is one. Okay.
I'm speaking as a teacher now, and teaching in a university. I teach the print matter, and I can imagine. I have heard all of you speak, and people who are in this business of online publication. I can imagine that you have a completely different kind of a readership. For example, your niche publishers, e-publishers, and your readership will also be a niche kind of readership. And what I'm actually driving towards is that point that was made a little while ago, that institutions of learning could be co-opted, and not only co-opted, but you could take them along in the business of popularizing this particular medium, and also thereby unearthing real talent, which is now just waiting to erupt. And you know, I work with young people all the time, and these are 18 to 21-year-olds and 22-year-olds. They have such tremendous talent, and sometimes you wonder why you're reading something that has been given the respect of being published, printed. Somebody has spent so much time editing it and, you know, actually giving it a home. When there is so much happening within these grounds of the university. Yeah. So maybe you could, I'm not asking a question, but nonetheless, it would be a good idea to have as starting, you know, a start to this co-option. You could possibly have a particular issue which calls out to these youngsters and ask them to...
Yeah, that's a great idea. No, and firstly I'd like to, I think I disagree that it's a niche readership and a niche, we publish just, your short story might have been in an anthology, and if lucky enough by Penguin, I mean, we publish, for example, Anantmurthy, who's read in universities. So it's not, I'm just throwing him out, but we publish a lot of wonderful writers. And so it's not as if we're a niche literary segment. I think it's just that we're relatively unread, perhaps, by a larger audience. But to be honest, we get a lot of submissions from university students. So it's not as if we're unknown. But what I think would be an enormous shift in the perception of the way in which journals like ours are read is if the university in some senses puts it into a syllabus, you know. And so that really is an interesting idea. I think in the US, certainly a lot of the literary journals are supported by universities, and many of them after the economic downturn in fact went only online because of the financial pressures of publishing a print journal and sending it out and so on. And yes, that's a wonderful way to go and a wonderful platform for young writers. And do tell your young, talented writers to send us stuff.
Yes, but it's true that your students are probably more familiar with online journals than you know, the teachers and professors are. But once you point them towards these journals and show them what they're all about, most of them are very interested. So that's what I found. So it's just some resistance towards sitting at the computer and actually going to.
The point about, the insertion of this new medium into the syllabus is the point actually to be carried forward to the universities. And this is something that has to be done whereby that disrespect, that suspicion for this virtual medium one can get over it and get beyond it and start reckoning it with the same kind of reverence, with the same kind of respect, and with the same kind of open mind and heart as print.
Yay, I agree.
Yeah.
Please help us, Meenakshi. Let's
Put us on your syllabus.
There's a TED talk by Dr. Subhata Mitra. I think he also stays in Delhi. So he conducted this interesting experiment called holes in the wall. So what he has done is that he created some of these holes in the wall and inserted computers in the slum area. Now slum people, kids are not educated, and they have to explore. So first of all, they see, they don't know what it is. Then they go, they try to figure it out, and they, finally, after a few days, they are able to figure out what it is, how to use, and how to even surf the net and find information. So what he says is schools are outdated now. What he says, you just create these kind of holes in the walls, and then let people explore what they want. So based on their whatever abilities, internal desires, or various other interesting terms he uses. So they will be able to figure out what they want to do in life, what they want to figure out, and how to get it. So that's the future of education he is proposing. Just wanted to share.
Do we have any more questions?